of the Louis Pabon Kring, welcome to this discussion evening from Bandung to Gaza. After an intense week of exchanges and meetings with students, lecturers, researchers and activists in Antwerp, Ghent, Hasselt, Leuven, Brussels, tonight is the time for a concluding meeting with 4 distinguished guests. 1, 2, 3, 4. We hope that tonight you will be as inspired as the hundreds of young people we met this week. But first, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Vijay Prashad. For his boundless energy, his fresh and sharp insights, his openness towards students, his humor and his warmth. In these uncertain and confusing times, you manage to help people imagine a different, better future and discover appropriate methods to achieve it. Vijay, truly, thank you so much.
No, please. Yeah.
I would also like to mention Choi, who will be recording this evening, and the footage will be available on our website. On that website, you will find also information about the celebration of the Boon Kring's 40th anniversary next week. Don't miss it. Yes, you can also find flyers on the table over there. So, now I would like to give the floor to Gie Goris, former editor-in-chief of Mo magazine and the best moderator we know.
Wow, what an introduction. The best moderator we know.
Distinguished public. If we are distinguished guests, then at least you are as distinguished as we are. Thank you very much for coming and for filling up the room. This has been quite a very well-organized week, it seems. If you can planify and find the room that exactly fit the public, the audience that will show up, and you know that ahead of time, then you're good organizers. So thank you very much for inviting us and for being here. We would like to do this evening in 3 different parts. First, we would like to have short testimonies from students who met Vijay the past week, interacted with him. We would like to hear from them what touched them and why this meeting was important. Then I'll interview, basically, I'll have a conversation with Vijay on the theme of the evening, from Bandung to Gaza. And then we will invite Koenraad and Elena to come with us and to have a more broader discussion or conversation, which will also focus heavily on the latter part of the title, on the Gaza part. So that's more or less the outline of the evening. So to start off, where are the students that would like to give a short testimony? And Diederik and Choi, there was a microphone lying here and it just disappeared. So I don't know it was here?
Okay.
It
was mine. This is the one.
Okay.
It's not the road. It's the other one. It's a cheap one.
Okay. We'll put that back.
No worries. No worries.
Vijay and microphones is something to keep a close eye on, right?
Yes. This is a road microphone. The temptation to go home with it is very high.
Okay. Are there students among us that want to give the short testimony? Now is the moment. Could you come, be so kind? I know you're shy and all of that, but we're all friends and distinguished. So are you. So, ja. Ja, oké.
Okay.
Als je spreekt in de microfoon.
Okay. We are 2 students from the Faculty of Social Science at U Hasselt, Emma Bonora and Anton Twans. And a couple of days ago, we had the opportunity to listen to a lecture by Dr. Vijay Prashad, and it was an encounter that truly changed the way we look at the world. Dr. Prashad focused on an important idea. Today, more than ever, we need people who are politically committed, who can think critically and independently. Not passive citizens, but active minds ready to question reality and try to do something, even when it feels uncomfortable. He explained how difficult and almost heroic it is to do research on development and global politics in his institute, Tricontinental, because of the limited funding, also due to the fact that he doesn't want to limit freedom or control what researchers should study. It's a courageous choice, give up secure resources to protect intellectual independence. Then he invited us to think about time, our idea of the past, the present, but in particular of the future, because he explained that the past is very complex because of the national, colonial, and community base, but the future it's even more complex, because capitalism often turns tomorrow into just a continuation of today, and in this way we end up living in a permanent present where real change feels distant, even impossible.
Oh, great summary.
With a simple but powerful example, he showed us how our generation risks getting stuck in the same routine as our parents and our grandparents. You too, he said, will have to clean your toilet just like they cleaned yours. It was humorous, but a direct way to show how often we lack the tools and information to imagine a truly different future. But he didn't stop his criticism. He spoke about his new development theory, in which he tries to think about what to do with power whenever we get it. We are very good at criticizing, but not as good at building. We should take actions instead of waiting for other people to do something. We cannot keep waiting. Real change requires courage, imagination, and above all, responsibility. This is where his message touches us personally. Action starts with us, each one of us. Meeting Dr. Vijay Prashad, opened our eyes and reminded us that the future is not fixed, that we can step into action on our own. We start shaping it every time we decide not to stay silent, every time we decide to act. So do not wait for change, but become the change. Thank you.
Wow. Beautiful, guys. Thank you. Beautiful. What a summary.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
That was are there other students from other universities? If not, then we...
Somebody from here.
Okay. I know, it's always climbing over each other. Just think you're in an airplane, same thing.
Needing to go to the toilet.
So with a few students from Liège, with a few students from Liège, we had the chance to go see Vijay in Antwerp, and we really thought it was really interesting the way he talks about the vision that we have as Europeans on the world compared to the vision that Marxists from the global South can have on the developments in the world. And to put into perspective also what we have done in our history with European countries and what we are still doing right now, and the way European nations can be talking about what is wrong and what is good in the world, without doing some self-critique and seeing what our nations are doing right now. And the second thing I thought was really interesting is how imperialism is still very, very alive right now and something very actual right now. So that's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. So you're
Yes.
trips to the students were something that really stuck to their heart. I'm not good at this kind of stuff. All right, is that okay? Good. All right, so I think the value of these short introductions or reflections is that they immediately frame the kind of discourse, the kind of message that you've been bringing in terms of making the future and shaping it by action, looking at the own perspective as a Eurocentric perspective vis-a-vis another perspective. So we will be touching on all of those aspects as well, but I thought it would be good to start from Bandung, because the title is From Bandung to Gaza, and Gaza is something that everybody has been very, I think not everybody, but everybody here tonight has been very actively committed to for the past 2 years in one way or the other. But if we say from Bandung to Gaza, we make a historical arc. We say Gaza is not something that fell out of the sky on October 7th, 2023. It's something that connects with a very broad history. And to start with Bandung, we connect it to the period of anti-colonial movements, of liberation movements, which some of them were armed, others not, new independent nation states that were being formed and that came on the world stage. So why do you think it is important in 2025 to say, okay, it's 70 years ago, 1955, which is, by the way, the real reason why I'm the moderator today. It's not because I'm so good, I'm exactly as old as Bandung is. And they were looking for somebody that could represent what history looks like. Anyway, that was a joke that I thought I wanted to make. Bandung, so what was, to your understanding, the real importance of Bandung? Why do we need to talk about Bandung today?
So the first thing I want to say, sorry, is I'm so grateful to my friends in the, I'm always going to say it wrong, the Louis Paul Bon Kring. I don't know, firstly, how they've sustained themselves for 40 years. Yeah, Mark was trying to give me the story. I don't know how you did it for 40 years. Also, I don't really understand why you invited me. I really don't get it. But I'm really grateful to you, and I'm really grateful to the students for the sincerity of all the conversations. Because, for instance, yesterday in Leuven and the previous day in Brussels, and I think also in Ghent, there was really no agenda. I declined to give a lecture and instead just started ask me questions. And the sincerity with which people ask questions was extremely moving. And I think you should be really proud of the younger generation of people who are interested in changing the world. Also proud of the fact that I think they get why Bandung. Because Bandung, it's not only the conference in 1955, but it's a metaphor for the fact that the peoples of Africa, Asia, Latin America have ideas. You know, there's a tendency to make Che Guevara into an icon, for instance, you know, a photograph, a picture on your t-shirt. There's a tendency to say, if you remember Ho Chi Minh, wow, he was a great man. But nobody reads him. Nobody said Ho Chi Minh had ideas. You know, Che Guevara had ideas. He came to Algiers and gave a speech in 1965 about the world economy. There's no sense that these people have ideas. It's almost as if the West continues to have ideas and the South acts. They are guerrillas. If anything, you read Che Guevara on guerrilla warfare, or you read General Giap on guerrilla warfare. but not Ho Chi Minh's ideas about emulation, how humans should learn to emulate each other, or how people with experience should create a moral sensibility for themselves so that young people would like to emulate them. It's not this that you learn ideas, but you learn how to be as a person. And that's Ho Chi Minh's great contribution, in my opinion, to Marxism. You know, Marx and Engels, and then all of them, European writers, very few of them wrote about how you should treat other people, how you should, in a way, deal with other people and build movements. But Ho Chi Minh wrote it. So Bandung stands in, for me at least, as the idea that the people in Africa have ideas. They don't need Europeans to tell them what to do. They need Europeans to give them space to do what they want to do. And I think that's what Bandung stands for me.
But they knew that because there was a century at least of anti-colonial philosophy being developed from the Ottoman Empire all the way to Latin America. So they didn't need Bandung to realize it. Maybe it's a way to tell us in Europe that they were thinking and not just fighting. But what was the main idea that brought these leaders together, and what came out of Bandung?
Well, it's interesting. The ambassador of Venezuela is here. He will know the writings of Simón Bolívar. And, 200 years ago, Simón Bolívar uttered a phrase called the great, a new equilibrium. We need a new equilibrium in the world, Bolívar said in the early 1800s. In fact, through that long history of colonial struggle, people were looking for a new equilibrium. The people of the Congo, for instance, who were in the middle of a strike wave in the 20s and 30s leading up to Lumumba's election campaign. Lumumba didn't come from nowhere. He came from mass struggles that preceded him. They were saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be your colonial subjects. We want to be citizens of our own world. We want a new equilibrium in the world. We want, if I may say so, we want a new international balance of order. We want a new International Congress of Vienna, etc. But it's important to recognize that at Bandung and then at Belgrade, when the non-aligned movement was created, they were also talking to each other. When these people, when they were very young, Sukarno, Nehru and so on, came to Brussels in 1927 for the first League Against Imperialism meeting, it's the first time Lamine Senghor from West Africa had met somebody from Asia. And they could talk and they could contribute and learn from each other. The Chinese who were here talked to Nehru, and then Nehru remembered later when India sent assistance to the Chinese struggle. A person I'm writing about now, Dr. Dwarkanath Kotnis, who dies with Tudor's 8th Army in the 1930s. It's because they meet each other and talk to each other, and then they learn, okay, so you're from China, you're believing similar things as I. So Brussels, 1927, Bandung, 1955, Belgrade, 1966. These were places to tell the West, we have ideas, but also to tell each other, we are thinking together. And right now, just to jump to Gaza for a minute, right now, we also have to establish the fact that the Palestinians have ideas. The Palestinians don't need us to solve their problems. They don't need us to decide one-state solution, two-state solution. We need to fight to free the Palestinian political prisoners like Ahmad al-Sadat, 23 years in prison, Barghouti, 23 and a half years in prison. If the Palestinian political leaders are in prison, then there's nobody to lead the Palestinians in a political dialogue. And I think we are not remembering that Bandung or Brussels, these things actually mean that the peoples of the South have ideas and they know how to govern themselves. They don't need patronizing suggestions. They need solidarity. They would like expertise, but they don't need to be told how to live.
Yeah. Now, to stay slightly on the historical side, we're moving closer to today. No, it's fine. I mean, that's how we bounce ideas off. But the setting of Bandung and what came afterwards was basically there's two big frames in the background, I would say. One is the end of the colonial period in which Europe dominated the rest of the world in a direct way of occupying territory and everything. And on the other side, there's the bipolar world of the Cold War in the 1950s onwards, within which these new nation states, these new leaders and their movements, they find themselves, and that's why they start the non-aligned movement. Now, my question isn't just jumping forward. That Cold War period ended in a unipolar world. Did the movement manage, to your understanding, to deal with that historical change and remain relevant as it was in the 1950s and 60s?
So, I mean, when the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, it is catastrophic for the non-aligned movement, because the non-aligned movement, the Third World Project, whatever one wants to call it, was already convulsed by the debt crisis. I mean, you know, it's extraordinary when we go back and look at that period. In 1965, one of the greatest African intellectuals, Kwame Nkrumah, publishes a book called Neocolonialism. He's still the president of Ghana when he publishes this book. And I would like to say that it's the only book that was reviewed by the CIA. The CIA wrote a long review for internal use. You can now read it. It's available online, the CIA review. And at the end of the review, the CIA basically says, we got to get rid of this guy. And he's cooled the next year. But the reason that he's so threatening through this book and the project that Nkrumah has is Nkrumah is saying, look, you came to Ghana, you named it the Gold Coast because we have gold. You stole the gold, you leached our wealth, then you left, then you continued to leach our wealth by controlling our economy. We don't have any resources. We're having a hard time building hydroelectric plants and so on. When you left Ghana, you said, well, we civilized you. Remember what Macron said recently? He said the people in Africa should be grateful the French. For what? You know, in Burkina Faso, rural electrification rate is 9%. Where was the mission civilization of the French? When the British were thrown out of India, the literacy rate was 13%. Who did you teach to read and write? Small minority of the population. So we didn't really need colonialism. And Nkrumah said, you stole the wealth, you're continuing to steal the wealth. We are having a hard time developing our country. We're going to have to, because we want to develop, we're borrowing from you. We're borrowing our money from you to develop ourselves. And then the debt crisis hits these countries. Mexico goes bankrupt in 1982. It's the beginning. But then all these countries get hit. The IMF takes advantage of it. And the Soviet Union collapses. Between 1982, the Mexican bankruptcy, and 1991, collapse of the Soviet Union, is the destruction of the confidence of Bandung. Bandung as an idea that we have ideas, disappears. And from 1991 till about 2010, these countries of the global south begin to look to the IMF, to Washington, D.C. for ideas. And this is the worst period of my life, because I watched, very, very capable people turn to Washington and say, please tell us what to do. And there's a few exceptions. Fidel Castro was one of the greatest exceptions. And one of the best afternoons of my life, except the birth of my children, was when I got to spend an afternoon with Fidel Castro in 2001. My eldest daughter, who's here, had just been born. And I left to go to South Africa. She was like 5 months old. I went to South Africa and I was walking down the street and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, come. I went in there to a room and there's Fidel Castro. And he said, I want to talk to you about the battle of ideas. Several hours later, I left the room convinced that he was absolutely correct, that we have lost the confidence in the global south to articulate our ideas as Bandung ideas. Yeah. And since 2001, I personally have been committed to following the old man's advice which is to fight to establish the new Bandung.
Yeah. Now, I'm very happy that you mentioned the debt crisis because I was just having a discussion this week about the legacy of colonialism, and my feeling was, and I would like you to comment on that, that the focus on colonial legacy today obscures the reality of structural adjustment programs in the 1980s, although that has been maybe more destructive of the new nation states than the legacy of what came before. So is what you're saying in that line, and how did they restore the confidence by the 2010s?
So I just advertisement, next month, Grieve Chelwa, a Zambian economist, and I will publish a book called How the International Monetary Fund Suffocated Africa. And we just run through this exact story. It's actually a really, if I may say so, it's a really comprehensive attack at my friends and colleagues in the IMF. Because, you know, I know lots of IMF economists, and a lot of them are disheartened by the model that they follow. But there's a religious attitude in the IMF, particularly towards African countries. And in this, Transparency International, based in Germany, plays an absolutely dangerous role, because Transparency International makes the argument that it's public sector corruption that has ruined Africa, but it completely obscures the role of multinational mining corporations and others that are absolutely corrupt on the African continent through transfer pricing and various mechanisms. They continue to steal African wealth. And so you asked a really good question, how does it change? Well, it's the best place to do the example is Namibia. You know, Namibia fought an incredibly difficult national liberation struggle to win its independence. Germany conducted a genocide in Namibia at the turn of the last century. They eliminated the Herero and Nama people. You know, it was 30 years before the Holocaust. They did this on the African continent. It's completely obscured history. When I'm in Germany and I ask young people, do you know about the Herero and Nama genocide? Most people have no idea. You know, that they wiped out these populations. Okay, Namibia wins independence after a struggle in which the Cubans played a huge role. People will remember the Battle of Quito Conivale, where the Cuban troops come in. You know, they don't tell anybody they're coming. They come in and they defeat the South African army in Quito Conivale, and actually, in a way, provoke the independence of South Africa and Namibia. But when Namibia gets independence, it's hit hard by structural adjustment in the 90s. The government goes silent. SWAPO, which was the National Liberation Organization, Southwest African People's Organization, basically bends down in front of the IMF and says, whatever you say, we're going to do. Okay, just a few years ago, 2022, Munich Security Conference, the Prime Minister of Namibia is sitting on the stage. There is a German man harassing her, saying, why aren't you condemning Russia for the invasion of Ukraine? Harassing her. He's a white man harassing this black woman sitting next to a vice president of Colombia, Francia Marquez, looking at him going, take it easy, you know. She's the prime minister of a country. We don't know who you are, you know. I mean, have some decency. And she just turns to him and says, we are not going to condemn Russia for the following reasons. Number one, this is Europe's war. It has nothing to do with us. Why are you asking me to condemn Russia? You deal with it. We have our own problems. We don't ask you to get involved with our problems. See, European problem, deal with it. Why should we? Secondly, she said something really interesting. She said, during our independence struggle, the Soviet Union backed us 100% and you backed the South African regime. Why should we listen to you? And I thought, wow, where did she get the confidence to say that? A black woman, prime minister of a small African country, enormously indebted, and this is where she got the confidence from. For many years, Namibia was entirely reliant on the International Monetary Fund, entirely reliant on the US Treasury Department. And along comes the People's Bank of China, along comes the New Development Bank, along comes the new banking structures that are being built on the African continent. Namibia has choices, They don't need the money from the US Treasury Department. They go to Beijing, talk to the People's Bank of China, and they get the loan that they need. So she doesn't need to sit there and say, I'm so sorry, sir. Whatever you say, sir, I condemn Russia, sir. She just said, this is what we feel. And what I felt was that, in fact, and she's exactly my age, the Bandung spirit never died. It was just kept in a suitcase in the attic. They were waiting for the moment they could bring the suitcase down, open it, and let it flourish. And that's what we consider the revival of the Bandung spirit.
And is that because you refer to the new development bank and all that? That's not just China, that is basically BRICS based to a large extent. Is BRICS the tool that changed the power relations? Because of course it's basically the rise of China economically and then geopolitically, but China has chosen to embed that in a broader context. First 5 BRICS, now we're 10 BRICS, and a lot of them are lining up to become the next pluses at the BRICS table. So is that the core of the change that we're seeing?
Well, I mean, I actually don't think people on the European continent have come to terms with the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. I don't think there's a complete understanding of it. And there's a few reasons why there's not a complete understanding. And this applies to the United States as well. I think in these countries, there was a financial revival, led by liquefaction of the banking system. They put a lot of money into the banking system. It looked like things were reviving. Secondly, it's one of those things of history. The pandemic strikes and then Russia invades Ukraine. So people say these are the reasons why we are struggling. Why is growth in Germany spluttering at near zero, or in France? Why is growth in the United States, year-on-year growth, not just growth because of financial, infusions of money into the financial system? Why is it spluttering near zero? Well, in the global south, there was an immediate reaction to the financial crisis. There were meetings held. I went to some of the early pre-BRICS meetings. There were meetings held where countries said, listen, we have designed our entire economy, India has, China has, Brazil has, to export to Europe and the United States. Brazil was exporting enormous amounts of goods to Europe. And suddenly they said, what happens when the European and US markets stagnate year on year and they can't buy our goods and services? We have to look elsewhere. And so that's why in 2009, the first BRICS meeting is talking with absolute desperation about South-South cooperation, business alliances, business visas for the BRICS country, new subsidies for South-South or BRICS business opportunities and so on. I mean, the whole focus of the BRICS was never geopolitical. It was always about maintaining and sustaining the economic buoyancy of these parts of the world, no longer relying on Western markets. And from 2009, whether it's what has happened with the Belt and Road from the Chinese, or it's the BRICS process, or the revival of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which now is going to have a SCO bank, whether it's the RCEP, the world's largest trade bloc centered around Southeast Asia and China, whether it's the growth of an Africa Free Trade Agreement, or this despair in Latin America, the Brazilian finance minister Fernando Haddad saying we need more integration within South America. Brazil is terribly integrated in South America. It barely trades with its neighbors. Increase, make it more robust and so on. This was actually almost an economic existential problem. How are we going to survive if the Western markets disappear? So they pivot elsewhere. And pivoting elsewhere, they start to think, we need development banks. We need new systems of trade. We need new plumbing for a financial system. The West made an enormous error when it started to sanction one country after the other. And when the Western countries decided to remove Iran from the SWIFT system, this sent shockwaves across the South. I was at a meeting about 6-8 months after Iran was removed from the SWIFT system, and people were saying, we need to make our own plumbing for finance. We can't rely on Europe, because if Europe has a problem with us, they're just going to throw us out of the financial plumbing system.
Or confiscate the money.
Or
and use it.
confiscate the gold, Venezuelan gold in London banks, and confiscate Russian assets. They are not reliable. They are politicizing the economy. And so this is a very interesting theme, this politicization of the economy. In China, it's an enormous debate. The economy should not be politicized. It's very interesting to hear Communist Party officials talk about the economy should not be politicized, but frankly, I agree with them. The economy should not be politicized. We should be emphasizing trade development, having a kind of non-political approach to dealing with other countries. You can't politicize everything. And I think the West has made what I think is for the West a fatal error in doing this, because these countries are going in a different direction. And as I was telling the young people, the clock is ticking for Europe. Your decision regarding energy sources, it's soon going to end. It's going to start ringing the alarm. And you cannot have a salvage for the European standard of living if you go on this path of detaching yourself from cheap energy sources and relying on liquefied natural gas from the Americans. This idea that the Europeans and the North Americans can create an enclave is actually madness. Europe is part of Asia. It's not part of North America. And I don't know why Europeans can't get this into their head. They are part, there is a Europe and Asian continent. It does not make sense. It's terrible for the climate to have natural gas liquefied in the Gulf, and it's fracked natural gas. You're getting fracked natural gas liquefied, put on ships, transported across the Atlantic, de-liquefied, put into pipelines, super expensive, bad for the planet. I don't know what you people are doing. It's just insane.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
this is my thing, because, the clock is ticking for you.
Yeah.
The clock is really ticking.
Now, the resurgence of the Bandung spirit, it sounds really good, but it's a bit complicated. Like within BRICS, for instance, there's already for years discussion about taking the dollar out of international trade or replacing it, finding solutions for the dominance of the dollar. That doesn't move fast enough. So the global south sounds like an entity, but it is a complex reality of conflicting interests and choices and directions. So how is this going to create a different world order? One, two, will that new world order serve the least developed countries as well? Because looking at the BRICS, we're looking at the emerging countries, economies, while the least developed countries stay under the radar, whichever way you look at the world order, it seems.
It's a very complicated question, so I'm going to give you 3 or 4 pieces of an answer. The first is, I'm not a big proponent of de-dollarization. I think it's an error to emphasize that. Partly because most economic activity in the world doesn't require a foreign currency. Most countries are doing trades inside their country using their own currency. Most cross-border trade happens in local currencies anyway. It's only about 50% that's dollarized. The reason that it's such an important thing is it's 50% dollarized, and it has to do with oil, but I'll get to that in a minute. Most regional trades are anyway in local currencies or in currency monetary systems that have been developed. So for instance, in Asia, you're already seeing Russia and China basically trade in yuans and rubles. There's no dollar between them. India trades with Russia in rubles and rupees. I mean, this local currency trade is happening. The problem is that you have to trade for certain goods where the trade is totally imbalanced. Like, for instance, you can't, Saudi Arabia cannot buy enough goods and services from other countries to reconcile the amount of oil it sells to them. Yeah. So it has to have a third currency that it collects, and that's dollars. The reason it has to be the dollar right now is there is no country in the world that is going to forego capital controls in order to allow their currency to become a global currency. So that, for instance, the reason the dollar is an international currency for reconciling trade is that, you buy something from me and I pay you in dollars, and you don't have anything you need to buy from me. when the music stops, you can take your dollars back to the United States and buy land, or you can buy business. The United States allows its assets to be alienated. You can go in there, take dollars into the US banking system and buy something. That's the final trust. Apart from the trust of the dollar actually has a material form of trust. Can't do that with the yuan. The Chinese will not allow you to come into the country and buy land. It's a good thing. I'm happy they have capital controls. I'm happy that they don't allow capitalists to take money out of China. It's a very good policy. But because of that, the yuan cannot be a global currency. So I don't think we should hurry the process of de-dollarization. It's a very unnecessary thing. We need more local currency trade. We need to think of more regional currency arrangements, maybe some digital regional currency. The Brazilians proposed the sucre for Latin America. Chavez had proposed this idea 25 years ago from Venezuela. These are all good ideas. So let's leave the dollar question aside. It often eclipses the more important conversation, in my opinion, which is the one about inequalities in the global South. It's in 2013, I published a book called The Poorer Nations, in which one chapter is on a very little known report produced by a group called the South Commission. It was led by Tanzania's former president, Julius Nyerere, and it had a very interesting group of people as commissioners. It was set up by the United Nations. The purpose was to look at the Brandt Commission report, which had been headed by Bundesrepublik Chancellor Willy Brandt. The Brandt Commission, which was known as the Brandt Commission, was about inequality. And Willy Brandt's commission said that the North and South are divided by great inequalities. The geography of North and South is inequality. It's never been about the equator. It's about inequality. The South Commission report said it's not just about inequality, it's about power imbalances. The North is powerful in global institutions, the South doesn't have power. So one of the pieces of the report, and my chapter on the report after that is called The Locomotives of the South, is in the report and in their conversations. I was very lucky to read their deliberations. Unfortunately, most of their archive has been thrown away. It's in the South Center in a bomb shelter in Geneva, and for some reason the bureaucrats decided to throw parts of it away. It's a very interesting archive. In the debates, they said, this is in the 1980s, they said we should allow the more robust countries of the global South, led by China, because Nyerere had visited Shenzhen and said, what are they doing in China? We don't understand this. They should be allowed to grow, and they should be allowed to become the locomotives that then pull the rest of the South along with them. That was the metaphor that Nyerere used there. And I find that metaphor interesting. Every year, there's two events that I find very fascinating and very little remarked upon, even by the Financial Times, which I think is the best European newspaper that I look at. And I look at some of the ones in other languages as well, particularly the French papers, which have become so bad that it's really difficult to imagine. Apart from Le Monde Diplomatique, Le Monde has become so bad that it's really hard to imagine that the French bourgeoisie is actually educating itself accurately about the world. I mean, if you are a bourgeoisie, you need a good newspaper to educate you about the world. You don't want to just read, lies or half-truths. You need accuracy. How are you going to dominate the world if you're being lied to? Yeah, you need good reporting. And that's why I always tell editors, you're getting rid of your best reporters. You don't understand. Your elites are illiterate. I mean, they don't know anything, and it's a shame. So even the Financial Times doesn't cover this annual thing. What's the annual thing? The Chinese president first visit out of China every year is to an African country. It's been a thing since the 1960s. The first visit, it's interesting, it's not covered in the West that they do this. The second interesting thing is about 15 years ago, the Chinese government approached the 54 African countries and set up the Forum of Africa-China Cooperation, FOCAC. And there's a FOCAC meeting at the front of the year, every year. In the last 3 or 4 years at FOCAC, the Chinese have made an interesting presentation. They have said to the African countries, we think the trade is deeply imbalanced. In other words, We are coming in almost with a colonial attitude. We buy raw materials, we take the raw materials to China, we make finished products, we sell them to you. And what's happening is China has got enormous surpluses. This is creating imbalances in the Chinese economy. The surplus is going into real estate. We don't want these surpluses. It's what used to be called the Dutch disease. We don't want these surpluses. We would prefer if we could help you industrialize without loans, because you don't want this to be debt trap industrialization. We're going to help you industrialize. You process your product and we buy your processed product, so we're not buying it lower down the value chain. You are getting some of the value added, and therefore you can use that money to develop your own country. It's a very interesting discussion. Last 3 years, this has been the focus of things. Now, it's very difficult to put it into place because this means 3 things. Number one, you have to build a development plan for the countries of Africa. That means you have to rebuild the state. You have to rebuild capacity. You have to rebuild the Department of Finance. You have to rebuild the Planning Commission. Everything that the IMF destroyed in the last 40 years, as you were saying in your comment, it was actually state attrition. That was the IMF policy. Second, you have to build your financial whole sector. Not only the finance ministry, but the central banks have to be redone. The banking systems have to be improved. Africa needs a monetary system. There needs to be an African central bank, some clearinghouse for trade and so on. And thirdly, very important, China will provide science and technology, and that's going to come without charge, because China got this from Japan during the open up and reform period. They got it from Singapore because the Japanese said, we owe China our script, we owe China our language. And there's of course the thing they don't talk about, which is the vicious Japanese imperial massacres in China. They didn't say that. They just went back to, we owe you our script. That was the meeting Deng Xiaoping had with the Japanese premier. Said, we owe you our script, so we're going to help you. And Japanese firms came and helped China in the 1980s. They say to the same thing but we need to help you build capacity first. This is going to take a long time. Because to build state capacity, I wrote a line after NATO destroyed Libya. I said it takes 100 years to build a state, but you can destroy it in an afternoon.
Yeah. So you do believe that the locomotive metaphor is more tangible, real, and genuine than the lifting all boats, small and big, which was the trickle-down metaphor that was dominant in the world in the 80s. We have to grow, let the waters rise, and then all boats, small and big, will rise with it. That didn't happen because it's not about boats. So the question is it about locomotives and wagons on a trail, or can that metaphor get off the trail and get as disastrous as the boats?
I mean, I'm a revolutionary, so this is not a great method for me. Okay? But I also read Marx really carefully. And there's a line that Marx writes in the German ideology, where he says that communism is the actual movement of history. And you can't impose your ideals into the world. You have to struggle to establish your ideals materially. So I understand that, well, what do I want? What I want is for African states to have revolutions and for revolutionary governments to come to power and sit at the table and tell the Chinese and others, we don't want to negotiate with you. This is what you're going to have to do because of colonialism and etc. That's what I would like. But that's not where we are. Mm-hmm. We are not there. I mean, I don't want to impose my ideals where they are not a material force. I would like to see what's happening and then try to intervene and come in and make all kinds of pushes and pulls and be, as it were, cautious about how you talk to people and as I said, put yourself into history. The revolutionary who is arrogant says this is what should happen. But that revolutionary is sectarian and irrelevant to the historical process. And too many revolutionaries think that they should stand on a soapbox and dictate to the world, this is how it should be. I don't accept that. I believe that you have to look and see how is history moving and then find your place in it and try to do the most that you can. Yeah. And if the opportunity presents itself I mean, I'm going to go to unnamed African country early next year, where there's a possibility in an election we'll have a socialist president. And the socialist president wants to spend 3 weeks, or the candidate wants to spend 3 weeks doing, you know, a lot of training and thought and discussion, and they want to plan, what do we do? Let's think about a financial system, and I'm going to go there, spend 3 weeks with them, and we're going to bring other people, and we're going to do like a real camp of study. But that's because he thinks it's useful for him. I'm not going to zip in like Bernard Henry Levy to Libya and tell them what to do. You know, that's the classic colonial arrogance. You know, I'm going to stand there with my shirt open, my hair blowing in the wind, with my personal photographer photographing me. You know, I'm leading the revolution against the revolution. What is that? That's the classic intellectual arrogance. Our role as intellectuals isn't to pretend to be leaders. Our role is to accompany social movements, political movements, advise when necessary, take instruction when necessary, learn when necessary.
Yeah. So if you say we have to put ourselves in history and be fruitful within, and when asked and when the opportunity arises, okay, let's put you in history today. We live in 2025, and these are interesting times. Some people would say, how do you read the MAGA moment that we're going through, which is not just an American movement? And just last night, there was this publication of a security assessment giving broad support to the omvolking theory and saying we should support the extreme right in Europe and all of that. So are we actually living in a moment now of reassertion of American dominance, or is this a dramatic and pathetic ending of the American century?
It's definitely not the last one. Okay. It's not the last one because, I mean, I believe in the class struggle and dialectics and those things. So I don't believe in the Hegelian final moment. You know, I don't think anything ends. I think it has a mysterious way of asserting itself. Some people said, well, you know, Hitler is dead, Nazism is over. But the next day, one of his, Confederates becomes the head of the West German intelligence service. It has a way of asserting itself. I live in Santiago in Chile, and, the Vatican helped Mr. Cast free from Nuremberg. It actually helped him. He was a Class A to be tried war criminal. He was freed, and through the rat line of the Vatican, brought to Chile. His son is going to be the next president of Chile in the December election. I think Jose Antonio is going to win the election. Thanks Vatican for that little piece of history. That was really great. I mean, in Japan, Nobeshuko Kishi, Class A war criminal in Korea and in China, was rehabilitated by the United States, becomes the prime minister. His grandson, Shinzo Abe, becomes the prime minister many decades later, and then Shinzo Abe's protege is the current prime minister of Japan, and is absolutely bonkers.
Are you saying we will live with the Trumps for the rest of the century?
It's very likely. I mean, if you don't have the guts to denazify, you're going to live with them for a long time. And I would like to say that some people after 1945 did some pretty serious denazification. Freedom is an interesting word. Freedom is a very interesting concept. And I think, I don't want to get into that too much. I would like to stay with the MAGA moment, which you talked about. Because to some extent, this has to do with what happened in the global north in the 1980s, in the mirror to the structural adjustment period. I mean, think about what happened in North America, now it's no longer part of Europe, Great Britain, in the European continent. Think about what happened in those decades. What happened to social democracy? Social democracy picked up the gun of austerity and shot itself in the head. That's what it did. I mean, it decided miraculously that, hey, listen, we really don't need social welfare. People should be up on their own feet. We need to have more entrepreneurs in our society. Why are we wasting money spending it on welfare programs and so on? let's spend money on business. Let's give tax breaks to our billionaires. Let's allow Luxembourg to enjoy the tax money of Belgium and Liechtenstein and the Cayman Islands and 1 trillion, 2 trillion. We don't even know how much money is hidden there. There's tax-based declines in these countries. They start to brutalize society. Corporations have brutalized society. I mean, think about the working regimes for most people. Trade unionization rates down, the defense of the working class and its culture eroded, people working extremely long hours, Uberized industries. It's not just Uber drivers, it's the Uberized industries. Entire hiring practices done by Uber mechanisms. All of this was done by the social democratic forces. And then after 2001, it was the social democratic forces that said, let's give the police all the powers they need. Let's have new anti-terror laws. Let's lock people up whenever we feel like it. Germany basically strengthened the police forces, security forces. The intelligence can spy on anybody. And by the way, let's let the Americans spy on us, including Angela Merkel's cell phone. No problem. Come and spy on us. Let's let the Americans dominate us through NATO. This was all done by the liberal forces, by the social democrats. They brutalized society. And then a brutalized society takes its revenge on the elite. It turns around and said, we don't need you. We've got these new people who take our anger and just flick the switch, and our anger is suddenly politics. They don't have a future agenda. Trump doesn't articulate a future. Trump is able to just articulate anger. And the liberals then come screaming and yelling to the tiny left, saying, ally with us, we have to defend ourselves from the far right. But you produce them. First, sit down and have a serious reflection on your austerity agenda, on the brutalization, on the lack of ability to control the elites, that they keep their money elsewhere. They don't want to rebuild society. The only antidote to MAGA, the final antidote to MAGA is to rebuild society. Rebuild a kinder and gentler society. But the liberals are not willing to do that. Look at your own country. Where are the social democrats going? They should be actually taxing the rich more, putting wealth into rebuilding society, giving unions more power, allowing union or trade union working class culture to flourish, and so that workers don't have to live in a world where they feel sidelined by the culture of the elite. That feeling of revenge doesn't govern the working class. That's the only antidote, in my opinion, to MAGA, and it's nowhere on the horizon of the social democrats. Sorry, guys. I know many of you have a mixed relationship with the social democrats, and I went hard on them, but I think this may be untrue what I said about Belgium, but it's certainly true about Germany. It's certainly true about France. It's absolutely true about Keir Starmer's Labour Party, and it's definitely true about Biden's Democratic Party.
Yeah. So we won't go into the the
intricacies.
No,
yeah.
I want one quick question, and then we'll invite our other guests to the table. But why do you use the language of elites versus the people, which is exactly the language that the MAGA and far right are using, while a class analysis talks about rich and poor, for instance, workers and capitalists, rather than elites, because elites is a very elusive concept that is weaponized by the far right.
I can't wait to get back to just talking about the bourgeoisie, the proletariat. We have a vocabulary. It's just that really, literally, people don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it comes from French, but people don't understand what the bourgeoisie is. You know, the property owners or the proletariat. I had a T-shirt from the Swedish Communist Party which had the name of their newspaper, Proletariat. And somebody said to me in the airport, what is that? And I said, well, you know, it's a science fiction show. It's about the future when the proletariat, which is an interesting group of people, will take over the planet. And he was like, wow, is it a book or a movie?
It's a series.
Book or a movie? I'm not sure, but it's a science fiction thing for sure. Yeah.
No, so granted.
But your point is well taken. Yeah.
No, the question is, how do we? It's not about reverting to the 19th century, but avoiding to fall in the trap of populism in a sense that creates contradictions that are not necessarily immaterial.
You know, it's just that the water bottle was blocking the camera.
Oh.
And so you were getting a kind of distorted picture of you and me
I was
through the water bottle.
I was performing good, but
No, it's going to be an amazing clip of you and me through the water bottle.
Okay.
I mean, it is true, we need a better vocabulary. But, you know, this is an argument I have sometimes with my colleagues, people in the universities and so on. We can't just invent a new vocabulary, you know. This thing has started, I guess, 20, 30 years ago, where faculty just sort of, you know, invent words and they make new words for new things. But, you know, you can't just make up words for reality. The words have to come out of struggles and they have to come out of people's experience. And I mean, I think rich and poor is, I take your point, I'm going to start using rich and poor because it is in fact commonplace but it is also fascinating that before MAGA used that geography, it was from Occupy Wall Street, we got the 1%, 99, which is about property, in fact, yeah? It's not the elites. And I must say though, at some times, I feel like the language of elite is not a bad language because the word elite has within it elitism. And when I'm, very rarely, but when I'm in those spaces where I have to negotiate people who come from that sort of political or economic background, I do feel that they live in a different planet. They talk differently. I'm a very uncomfortable person in front of them. I've given talks in some of those spaces and I sort of just say really stupid things because I feel like you're going to think I'm a stupid idiot anyway, so I might as well just say a bunch of stupid things and get it out of the way, you know, because I feel nervous in front of you because you're going to look down on me. And that's an interesting internal problem, this problem of you think you're superior to me, and so I'm going to just grant you superiority, just to get it out of the way. Because you do feel like you're superior to me, or to us, or whatever. But I think we need to get over that, yeah? I mean, I'm not 55 born, I'm 67 born. I need to get over it. I think I'm now almost 60 years old. I should stop pretending that the elite is superior to me, okay? Maybe, yeah. They are not. I'm going to say it to myself in the mirror every day, yeah? I'm going to say, Donald Trump is not better than me. Donald Trump is not better than me. I might have a hard time with some of the European leaders because I still have this feeling of Europeans being a little more advanced than Asians. And there was a problem of English colonialism.
too much Macaulay.
Yeah, it's Macaulay and all kinds of things. Although, I mean, Keir Starmer really has ruined the thing for the English, you know. From Tony Blair to Keir Starmer, I mean, the English have really put up bad people to lead that country. Yeah.
Okay, given that, we'll invite two more academics to the table.
Yeah, good.
So that we can become a little less elitarian on that. I'll just shift to this. No, I want to sit on one side because I want to see all three of you together.
Yeah.
So that might necessitate.
Let's move the bottle out of the way so we fuck things up. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
I'll keep the bottle down here.
So, Koen Bogaert from Universiteit Gent and Elena Aoun from the UC Louvain. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation and for bringing in your experiences and your insights as well. And while the ambassador is going, I'll continue the introduction. So what we want to do is to work further on what we've been saying. I kept Vijay largely in the past to understand where we come from. Before we go to the future, we should better understand where we are at today. And both of you have been very deeply involved the past years in actions focused on the genocide happening in Gaza. And I would like to connect that to our conversation until now by asking how much of the struggle that we've seen was also a struggle against colonialism, against a colonial project? And how important do you think it is to take that perspective to the struggle and to the solidarity movements?
Who goes first?
Elena.
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for the conversation. It's so rich. And, well, I think that what the struggle for Palestine and in order to unveil the genocide and try to stop it is really part of the decolonial movement. And
Just
I think
checking. Is everybody following? No. But there's no.
okay.
So the microphone is only for the camera. It's not for the room. So you need your voice. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed, there is a kind of continuity between struggles for Palestine and that anti-colonial sentiment or decolonial sentiment. And I think that to put it very simply, I think that in our world, whether in the West, whether in the global South, whether in the North, we have some parts of the society who really do understand what is going on in Palestine and the colonial basis of the war there, of the marginalization of Palestinians, which has turned today into a full-fledged genocide. And that's on the one hand. On the second hand, I also think that it is precisely the legacy of colonialism that blinds so many people and so many elites, if I can borrow the term, whether political elites, whether economic elites, whether media elites, they are so blind to what's going on there. And just if I were to use one of the latest examples, I just cannot understand how the head of the RTBF can say that it's okay for us to go and join the Eurovision. We're not looking the other way, but still we will accept to go in the Eurovision. So my little fellow, if you're not looking away, how does it happen that you don't see what we are seeing, what many of you are seeing, what so many students are seeing, so many people around the world, and notably this, in the global South? So I think there is no clear-cut division between who's inherited that colonial vision and who is utterly insensitive to the Palestinian plight today, but we can extend it to so many other places around the world, unfortunately. And those who have understood the colonial structures of what's going on in Palestine and elsewhere and trying to revert it, trying to fight against that. Yeah. So I think there is a really strong interconnection.
Koen, is the colonial element the reason why the West is so supportive of Israel and is not able to see the reality of the genocide? Is it colonialism or what is it?
Right. It's definitely colonialism. And Elena mentioned Eurovision. I think it's actually not a contradiction that Eurovision allows Israel to participate in the Euro Song Festival because Israel was a Eurovision. I mean, it's actually a simple. Well but that's the history, and I think the whole dichotomy between seeing and not seeing, and why do we see it, and why do the political leaders do not? Why don't they see it? I think it kind of misleads us because they do see it. And colonialism is what makes them capable of seeing it and continuing the genocide, because the Palestinians are dehumanized, right? Yeah. And it's that very dehumanization which allows the genocide to continue. And to be honest, I was shocked to notice that I didn't saw it, that they saw it. in the sense that I've been studying colonial history for like the past 15 years. And even then, I'm sorry to say, but I didn't think it was still possible. So I was misled by their, and I'm going to use, Vijay, you talked about the Bandung as a place where people do not only struggle but have ideas. And if we go back to Hassan Kanafani, who's a very interesting Palestinian thinker who was also murdered in the 70s by the Israelis. He wrote a bunch of very interesting novels, beautiful novels, but he also had a couple of very interesting essays where he produced theory and thinking. And one of the concepts he came up with was blind language. And he was actually criticizing the PLO and the PA, the PLO, not the PA, the PLO after 67, and the way they kind of accepted the occupation, but were still talking in a language of struggle, revolution, democracy, and so forth. But he said it was a kind of a blind language because they didn't really mean what they said. And I think after the 7th of October, we can really use that concept, that thinking for the European politicians, because they were also still talking in concepts like human rights, democracy, we are enlightened, the rest is dark, whatever. Our prime minister literally used the phrase, the civilization, sight of the light, civilization against the darkness of the Palestinians, and that's how he supported Israel. And I think what we've been up to the last 2 years is this blind language by our politicians. And the problem with that language is that they continue the genocide and still talk in the language of democracy, human rights, is that they erode the meaning of those very concepts and they render them useless. And that's a very problematic issue for social movements, because they mobilize through that language or they invent new language. And I think the necessity now is to invent new language. The problem is
Vijay is against.
No. I exactly agree with you. It's invent concepts arbitrarily. I'm against. I'm very much for movements developing new languages, new ways of seeing things, but coming out of collective processes. Yeah.
But that is actually what I wanted to say. I mean, for example, again, if we go to the history of ideas and this misnomer that the global south wouldn't invent ideas. I think one of the problems is that all the ideas the global south came up with were later co-opted also by the West and presented as their own ideas. I mean, the way we talk about democracy, human rights today, I think we then refer back to the French Revolution, the American Revolution, but the crucial revolution that was behind the meaning of the concepts we use today was the Haitian Revolution. And the Haitian Revolution was by far the most radical of the three revolutions. And if we think about human inequality, democracy, and freedom, the way we think today, it's because of the Haitian intellectuals and the Haitian radicals and the Haitian revolutionaries who radicalized some of the concepts Europeans came up with, but they were also only meant for white people, white men, right? And so the Haitians radicalized those concepts and opened them up for everybody. So they didn't necessarily invent new language.
So we started from the question, what is happening in Israel, or what Israel is doing in Gaza and the West Bank, as a matter of fact, and the broader region, is that should we look at it through the perspective of colonialism to understand it? There you seem to say both. Yes, it is, because it is deeply a colonial project, and the fact that the West is supporting it is because it is seen as a colonial project that is our project against the other side. And you mentioned, Koen, and I wanted to touch upon that, but you already mentioned it, the fact that the West is supporting the genocidal policies has undercut its credibility as a purveyor of human rights, of universal human rights, of democracy, of the rule of law, things like that, of a multilateral system. So how bad is that? Because, I mean, it could be seen as one or two things. It is a reckoning with history, because we've never been really working for universal human rights. We've been proclaiming them as long as they would serve us. So it is a reckoning with history, or it is undermining the project for the future, because we need universal human rights more dearly now and tomorrow than ever before. So delegitimizing them is maybe what we absolutely should avoid. So Vijay, which way do you see it, and how do we get out of that?
I mean, I actually don't think that this is delegitimizing the discourse of human rights or universalism, because this happens periodically. You know, when the United States illegally attacked Iraq and then had black sites in Poland and Egypt and built Guantanamo, and then the pictures from Abu Ghraib leaked. I mean, what human rights? Well, then the United Nations was mobilized to hold a big conference where they discussed the question of responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention. And they revived internationalism. And then what did they do? They went and illegally destroyed Libya. Why illegal? Because the actual resolution, 1973, on Libya said no fly zone. Didn't say you can bomb the whole state. They did that. After 2011, well, then you revive internationalism again. I mean, this has happened over and over again. There are waves. One of the ways that this happens, and this is what truly worries me, is that we still live in the world, despite the new mood, despite the new banks and so on, we still live in a world where the collective West controls information systems. I mean, look how remarkable this is. There is an actual genocide happening in Gaza. The International Court of Justice looks at the evidence and says plausible evidence of genocide. It's pretty good. There is, and then the whole West says there really isn't a genocide. Germany goes to the ICJ and says there isn't a genocide. I'm told that in Belgium, the king has said the word genocide, but the prime minister hasn't. However, an obscure right-wing German scholar sitting outside the Langley office of the CIA writes a report saying there's a genocide in China, and suddenly all the Western newspapers say there is a genocide happening in China. And even now, I travel to places and people say to me, you deny the genocide in China. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. Would you talk like that to your prime minister, who denies a genocide which the International Court of Justice says there's plausible evidence for it? The ICJ has never commented on anything in China, but it's not about China or Palestine. This is about communication systems. The West dominates communication systems. The moment the dust starts to settle in Gaza this time, they are going to revive their superiority. I mean, I was in Gaza after 2014. I didn't think that the bombing could ever get worse than that. And obviously it has got worse than that. And let me tell you, within 6-8 months of the dust settling, the population in the West is going to go back to McDonald's. I'm sorry to be so blunt about this, it's going to go back to its debate about pensions and so on. And the Palestinians will be forgotten. There'll be some boutique discussion here and there about whether it should be a two-state solution or a one-state solution. Israel will win the Eurovision. The Maccabees will be back in Amsterdam, celebrating their team. These things are just going to go on as usual. I'm very sorry to say that the delegitimization, even in the global South, of Israel right now will be turned around because the Western communication system dominates not only in the West but around the world. Nobody is allowed to believe media from Russia, media from China, media from the global South. Why? Because you go to YouTube, they say under that this is funded by the Chinese government. But it doesn't say that this newspaper is subsidized by the Belgian government.
One quick question there. Is it the Western media that are dominating, or is it the Anglo-Saxon? And I'm putting it on the table because we conflate those two very often.
I'm sorry about that, because I understand what you're saying. And today I had a very nice discussion with a person from De Morgan. Very nice journalist. Name is Ernesto. terrific fellow originally from Ecuador, really good conversation. I get your point, but here's the thing. You're right, it's not Anglo-Saxon alone, because it's Reuters, it's Associated Press, it's Agence France-Presse. These three, as syndication services, dominate international reporting. So you're right, it's these three. A little bit CNN, a little bit BBC. So it is, in fact, the Anglo-Saxon plus Agence France-Presse. So it's definitely not the Belgian media that's setting the terms.
No, if we would dominate,
it would be perhaps worse, but we don't know. Yeah.
I would like to stay on the fact of delegitimation and how that is restored, because we're living in the moment of a ceasefire. So why are we using the ceasefire language, which already relegates Gaza to page 17 rather than page 1 or 2 in the newspaper or the front of the evening news? Already it is happening while the attacks on Gaza are continuing. So what's the power of that language?
Well, actually, we are being cheated, and most of us accept being cheated. And I would add that, unfortunately, I'm not an expert in media, but what I can see is that most journalists hardly know what they're talking about. I have a very small experience, and it's based on my interactions for the last couple of years. And most often than not, I don't find words to describe the extent of their lack of knowledge of what they are talking about. I will just give what, I'm sorry, of course, I'm not talking about everyone.
No, it's
but
okay.
I'm
Okay,
talking.
go ahead.
But we need to be sincere. I think that the younger generation lacks knowledge. I think they are squeezed time-wise. They have hardly any ability to investigate further on the topics they are talking about. So they are working in dreadful conditions, and the problem is that they are providing us with dreadful level of information. And just to give you one example, we've been talking about the ICJ. I have been interacting in the midst when we were waiting for the ICJ to give its ordinance. I was talking with a journalist, and he wasn't even aware about the case being brought by South Africa. And this is one of the key media in Belgium. I'm not going to present which one it was.
I'm very curious now.
Later on. Yes, of course, and they are they want to soothe us. And our leaders, but the very idea, I think, of that ceasefire, the conditions, the terms of the plan, of the peace plan, it's gaslighting. I cannot find a better word to describe it, but the same goes on for what has been happening for 1 year in Lebanon. What's been going... Do you hear a lot about the West Bank?
No.
Do you hear a lot about what goes on in Eastern Jerusalem? Anything about southern Syria or southern Lebanon, just to name a few spots. So there is a kind of blindness, and I think that the people know, most of them know, at least the people in the top levels. I hope they have a bit of knowledge about that, but they totally disregard it because I think basically they want us to forget about Gaza.
Is the movements that you've been involved in and that we've been seeing in universities, but increasingly throughout society, are they able to counter that disinformation, this lying campaign about the actual state of what is happening today?
Yes, short answer. No, but I mean, they did. that's the thing. I mean, we are talking about the media and how bad the media is today because of the ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire, but they have been bad throughout the whole genocide. And from the very beginning, the press was awful, but still it didn't. It wasn't able to prevent millions of people to hit the streets and to protest. Yeah. So I think we shouldn't focus too much on the media and its failure. Fuck the media. I mean, it's the title of a book, so I'm just quoting the title of the book, but or at least some media. Because I think...
watch out what you're asking for, because the government thinks fuck the media too, especially if they're independent media.
Not that media. No, but I mean, I think what we saw, and this is, and again, also we started this whole the question with has the West lost its credibility? And I think in the end, that's a good thing, right? That the West lost its credibility, and the millions of people that are mobilizing now in the streets are gaining credibility, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is a shift. So there is not a loss of universal principles and values that we strive for. It's just that the West cannot claim them anymore. And I think it's a good thing that they cannot do that anymore. And social movements are trying to claim them. Do we see a decline in social movements? Of course, because social movements, it takes a lot of energy to hit the street, to organize. And it's normal that when things seem to calm down, that social movements will also calm down. But in a way, I'm very inspired by people like Rosa Luxemburg or Frans Fanon. Rosa Luxemburg has an excellent essay on strikes, the mass strike, where she also describes a whole history of mobilization, social movements. And she says, okay, at a certain moment, there's an ebb and flow. And so at a certain moment, these movements lay low and they seem to disappear, but there's always a kind of mental sediment that remains. And I think when I see my students today and those who were involved in the encampment, it's something they will never forget. And there's this mental sediment that they will use when there's a new opportunity. And it's you cannot take that away anymore. So even though it seems calm, I don't think things go back to normal. And that's also the other person I wanted to refer to is Frans Fanon, and what he really showed us through his work is that the struggle for emancipation is always an emancipation in the struggle, right? So we should not underestimate what it did to people personally, on a personal psychological level, to be involved in so many demonstrations, in all kinds of civil disobedience actions, in all kinds of encampments. It really emancipated them. They were not just fighting for emancipation, they emancipated themselves, and it's a force to reckon with. And I think the elites, if we can use that word, they know. I mean, they should know. Otherwise, maybe they're stupid. You said they were stupid because they don't have good papers anymore. So hopefully they're stupid enough not to know that there's a lot of radical potential today amongst many peoples, and I think it can be taken up again whenever the next trigger happens. And one thing we can be sure of, and this is the tragedy we've seen the last 2 years, the Israelis won't stop. And when things seem calmer in Gaza, which is not true, things intensify in the West Bank. And they just move direction. I just came back from the West Bank. I mean, the tension is enormous. The people I saw there were talking about attacks every single day. So and luckily we see more and more stories appearing in our media about the West Bank. So in a way, I think we shouldn't underestimate that all the social movements and all the mobilization, all the organization that has been going on for the last 2 years kind of pushes journalists not to ignore the issue and to put it on the agenda. And the more space we claim, the better, because there is a narrative struggle going on at the moment, and we have to be vigilant, and so we have to keep on pushing. But there is a lot there that cannot be taken away.
I think it's extremely important, Koen, that you bring that to the table, because the experience of protest, of action, of coming together, of speaking out is emancipating, and it's you cannot alienate it back from the people that went through it. that doesn't mean no.
Yeah, well, one thing. I mean, I've been there. The 40-day encampment in Ghent. I mean, I could not do that in my class. What they did during those 40 days. I mean, they learned so much more than we are able to provide them with in class. So, and then they came to class and challenged their teachers. I mean, and they taught us as well, because they learned so much more than a lot of my colleagues did, probably.
Vijay, that doesn't mean that all is well for the future. And one of the things I wanted you to comment on is we think about the world very often. We use the terms global north, global south, and the West. And we've been talking about how the West has been supporting Israel in its genocide. But that doesn't mean that the global south as one opposed Israel or gave voice to the Palestinians. I mean, if you look just at the Middle East, at the Arab countries, it's revolting sometimes how ready they are to play to the music of Israel. So how does what we were discussing about before, about this kind of a resurgent Bandung spirit in the global south, how do you connect that with this not so brave response to the genocide of all players in the global south?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very important issue because I don't want to go through the list of them, but I would love to. I mean, it's shameful how Jordan and Egypt behaved particularly during this period, because in Jordan, the queen, who herself is Palestinian, gave two what I thought of as very good interviews to Christian Amanpour of CNN, where she basically laid out one view of a Palestinian's dismay at what was happening with the Israeli genocide. And I thought the interview was very good. Meanwhile, her husband, is the king. And well, why didn't he say to the Israelis, the 1994 agreement between Israel and Jordan is on the line. If you don't stop bombing now, we're going to tear the agreement up. Why didn't he put that on the table? Egypt, even worse. General Sisi, I mean, I said it from the beginning that General Sisi better be very careful, because in 1948, when the Israelis broke the partition plan and illegally violated the agreement that the British had made. I mean, the British made a imposed partition on Palestine like they imposed a partition on India and Pakistan. The difference was that in India and Pakistan, by and large, the Indian and Pakistani governments accepted the line. There are some disputes at the Kashmir region, but by and large, neither India nor Pakistan invaded each other. Israel completely violated the partition plan. I mean, it's a complete scofflaw state from the beginning. It just, threw out Palestinians from villages, cleared out the area, basically was conducting the genocide from the day the ink dried on the Genocide Convention of 1948. So that has been its history. Egypt in 1948, they had all these weapons that King Farouk had bought, which they didn't use against the Palestinians. And when the Egyptians went in to defend the Palestinians in Gaza, that part of they discovered that most of their weapon system were defunct. Gamal Abdel Nasser and his friends, who had been sent to defend the Palestinians, sat in the military camps and said, this is useless. This king is useless. They plotted against him. 4 years later, they put him on a yacht and say, go off into the Mediterranean, and that was the Free Officers' Revolution. So I gave an interview to an Egyptian newspaper, since shut down, and said that, well, I hope that the generals sitting in their camps are looking at the brigadiers and captains under them who should be humiliated by their behavior with all those F-16s. They're not even flying no-fly zones over Egypt. I mean, this is an ideological problem. This is not merely about the global south. It's an ideological problem of the utter collapse of pan-Arabism. I mean, just look at the situation in Syria. I mean, in Syria, the descent of pan-Arabism has been just, astounding. And it doesn't start with Ahmad al-Shara coming to power. This goes back to the time of the ophthalmologist leader of Syria. I mean, he should never have been the president of Syria. He doesn't come out of the political tradition. Dynasties should not be promoted. It was extremely, the descent of Pan-Arabism was extraordinary. Pan-Arabism has largely been defeated in the Arab world and requires a long period of revival. And it's not a question of Arab governments not doing anything. It's an ideological question. I mean, this is the victory of the Saudis against Nasser, which a victory which they had been fighting since 1952. They in fact fought a war on this issue. The Saudi monarch's line has prevailed and Nasserism has been largely defeated. And the consequence of that can be seen in Gaza. I mean, who backed Hamas? It wasn't the Pan-Arab governments. It wasn't even Gaddafi. It was the Qataris. It was the Muslim Brotherhood. They backed them. Where are the Pan-Arabists among the Palestinians? They are all sitting in jail. Barghouti, Al-Sadat, etc. Who's speaking for them? I mean, in many of the meetings I said to people, why haven't the encampments raised the issue of free the political leaders of the Palestinian people? I mean, I very much dislike the way that we have allowed the leaders to talk about, oh, there's a political prisoner in Russia, or there's a political prisoner in Cuba. What about the political prisoners sitting in Israel? I mean, and there are human rights groups galore in Europe. I mean, you walk into the wrong building and look at the board looking for a friend, and there's some office of human rights, some European Union office of human rights, Commission of human rights, Department of human rights. I mean, this is a European phrase, human rights. But I haven't seen even one commissioner talk about Ahmad al-Sadat's case. 23 and a half years. Marwan Barghouti, 23 years and 7 months. I mean, what the hell is going on? Why isn't somebody saying free them? Because they are Pan-Arabs. And in fact, it's interesting how Israel favors the Muslim Brotherhood Palestinians and has always done so, and has oppressed the Pan-Arabs because they understand the ideological game they are playing. It's very interesting. I know that Hamas has played an important role in the struggle now and so on, but they have deliberately eroded and destroyed Pan-Arabism. Israel is a partner of Saudi Arabia in the destruction of Nasserism across the Arab world.
Elena.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you've brought. But there is, but in addition, I would say there is a word I have been circling. It's the word domesticated. And I think that Arab countries have been domesticated either because they are poor, such as Jordan and Egypt, and now Syria, of course, and Iraq, and they totally depend on American money. So they need just to shut out, and their elites is totally interconnected with Western interests. And the wealthy countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, etc., they are part and parcel of the money game. And I think in different ways they are domesticated into that these economic capitalist connections, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Elena and Vijay already said about the global south and some of these regimes like in Egypt and Jordan, I think there's another element that goes with the domestication element in the sense that, of course, the regime of Mubarak before the Arab revolutions was also domesticated by the US. And I think they also fear, those domesticated regimes today, they fear social movements and protests. And one of the mistakes I think Mubarak made, and he didn't know in the past, but I think Sisi knows today, is that when the second Intifada happened in 2002, he let the Egyptians go out in the streets and protest against Israel and for the Palestinians in solidarity with the Palestinians. But he didn't realize that the Egyptians were meeting each other on the streets, right? And starting to know each other and starting to organize. And so Kifaya came afterwards, which is enough in Arabic, and there was a domestic social movement emerging, which eventually led to Tahrir, so the 2011 revolution. So I think now you see that these domesticated leaders, they don't even let their people go out and support Palestine because they know they will see each other, meet each other, start discussing the internal problems and form movements that can actually threaten those regimes. So that's another element that we see, I think.
It connects to a question that I had because when we started in Bandung in 1955, Vijay did as everybody would do, enumerate the names, Nehru and Sukarno, Zhou Enlai was there. I mean, we know the figures, the big leaders. When we're talking about leaders now, we're talking about them in terms of domestication. Do we lack the leadership that we had 70 years ago? Do we need that today, or is that a model of the past altogether? Vijay.
I mean, I think we have them today. I mean, I named a few Palestinian leaders who are in prison and should be immediately released on various grounds. One of them on the grounds of torture, because I mean, you have an Israeli political leader go and harass him and film it and put it up online. That's a violation of some part of the European Convention of Human Rights, I'm sure.
More than one.
Yeah, I mean, of many parts of it. Yes, we do, because in fact, movements, leaders of movements speak for movements. They embody the movement. You know, they are not leaders separate from movements if they are not leaders of movements. Movements without leaders strike me as movements that will eventually put up leaders who may not come from those movements. You know, it's very interesting that in Bangladesh there was an upsurge, and then suddenly Muhammad Yunus was flown in from the United States to become the president of Bangladesh. Why not have one of the people who emerged out of that movement become the leader? Maybe there wasn't really a structure, and that's a problem. You know, that is a serious problem. In Tahrir, you mentioned Tahrir. Well, you can't have I'm sorry, I have had this debate with a lot of people already that, you know, you can't really believe that there are actually things called horizontal movements when you're at a scale of tens of thousands, indeed millions of people. You're going to have structures, and those have to be representative, and they have to produce people who are going to have to be accountable to the movement. And real leadership is not a leader who goes ahead of the movement, but a leader who's accountable to the movement, who emerges from the movement and is accountable to the movement. I've met many remarkable leaders in our time. I will give you a couple of names. One of them is Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso, an extraordinary man. He is very young. He understands his role in the Sahel region. He's a military officer. By the way, my greatest hero of my whole youth, who inspired me and made me in a way a revolutionary, was Thomas Sankara. Also led a military coup. Also was assassinated in 1987, one of my great heroes. Ibrahim Traoré reminds me a lot of Thomas Sankara. I find him pretty remarkable. There are millions of people like that in the global south. I mean, I could enumerate those names from today. I don't want to list them. Some of them may get killed. So I don't want to have anybody start making lists of them. But they exist, and they are remarkable, and they lead movements. You know, I spent a lot of time in Brazil with the landless workers movement. One of my great advisors and friends is a leader of that movement, Nuri Rosetto. Incredible person, completely accountable to that movement. For decades has been its leader. You know, João Pedro Stedil, another incredible voice for the Latin American revolutionary movements, leads a movement of 1 million people. In India, Pinarayi Vijayan, who is the leader, who is the chief minister of Kerala. Kerala has just walked out of poverty. 1st of November, they announced that the last 100,000 people have been removed from poverty. Pinarayi Vijayan is an inspirational figure, leads the communist movement in Kerala. There are lots of people. The problem is, and this is a serious problem, is every time I pitched a story, to a publication in the Anglo-Saxon world, and I say I'd like to do a story, I want to interview Pinarayi Vijayan, nobody knows who he is, not interested. I'm going to do a profile of Ibrahim Traore. He's a dictator, you know, we don't really want to, if you got to bring up in the story that he's a dictator, okay, you're never going to hear about them.
Yeah. We have to wrap up, but the important thing that you were saying, Vijay, is they have to be leaders of the movement and respond to the movement and be accountable to the movement. So we're talking about movements again. I think that's maybe the core issue that we are talking about today. If we're talking about anti-colonial struggle, or we're talking about fighting the genocide in Gaza today or whatever, we need movements to change the world into a better place. So I would like to ask all three of you now, what kind of agenda do we see for solidarity movements in Europe today? What is the agenda and where does it come from? Who is formulating the agenda? Where are we working towards when we talk about solidarity movements in Europe, in Belgium, for instance, because that's our habitus. This is our work. So please give us an idea. What should be on our agenda? Elena.
Yes, what should be? I have a relatively pessimistic view. I think that you are very scattered. And to a large extent, I think that the youth do not even realize what's waiting ahead. And I'm really afraid about the consequences of the decisions that have been made in order to rearm Europe. And I think that it's going to eat at our states, it's going to eat at our societies, it's going to weaken social movements, because everyone will be much preoccupied with how they eat, their jobs, etc. Because it's 5% of the PIB, GDP, I'm sorry. So it's quite worrying. And I see a kind of, but perhaps it's, what I do see, I think there is a kind of exhaustion also, because there are so many fronts on which to fight. The environment is one front, and when we see how Groen and at least the Green in Belgium has fared very badly in elections, etc., my feeling overall is that there is a kind of exhaustion. Yeah. But I may be pessimistic. I hope you have better...
The agenda for the movements.
Sediments.
Yeah.
I'm actually more optimistic. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't think there is an agenda for the movements. It's the movements who put the agenda on the table, and that's what we have seen for example, when I see the evolution in my own classroom for the last 10 to 15 years, there's a radicalization happening among students, and I think it's a good thing. It's absolutely something we should cherish. And what they put on the agenda, we started the conversation, or the panel conversation at least, with why can't the elites see, or do they see, or do they not see the genocide? I mean, even if they wanted to ignore the genocide, social movements have put the genocide on the agenda. And the thing is, most of these young people who were radicalized in these social movements, they were not only radicalized by the genocide, the Palestinian genocide alone. A lot of them were already radicalized, and they were radicalized through ecocide and the environmental justice issue. And in Europe, it's maybe different than, for example, in the United States, where a lot of these pro-Palestinian solidarity movements came out of Black Lives Matter movements and indigenous solidarity movements. In Europe, they came out of climate movements. For example, the encampment in Ghent was a coalition between the Ghent Students for Palestine and Fossil, a radical climate justice movement. So there is already a radicalization happening, and it's young people who are pushing that radicalization. And of course, a lot of them cherish their horizontal ways of organization, and we could criticize it because I think at a certain point there is a need for leaders. But what I've seen when I was at the table with students and the other side at the table with some of our known leaders of civil society and social movements, it was often these young students who were dictating the conversation, who were strategizing in the wisest way, in the most compelling ways. And they were really educating those more experienced leaders. And so they probably will become the leaders. The problem is that sometimes they're not allowed to emerge as leaders. And this is, again, to refer back to Kanafani with the blind language. He was criticizing the Palestinian leadership of using the blind language and therefore preventing a young leadership to emerge, right? Yeah. And I think that's something that we will have to wait and see. But the students I met the last 2 years, I mean, give them 10 more years, 5 more years, they will be amazing. I mean, I was so impressed by them, by many of them, getting emotional a little bit, but no, I mean, I'm optimistic. Yeah. So make it happen.
Vijay, the last word.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, we're in Brussels 100 years ago. Little known people came to Brussels for a League Against Imperialism meeting. Some of them went back home and were killed immediately by the colonial forces. Very interesting that they met here. They gathered together, and I think some papers going around about a commemoration. I'm part of the committee with Wim and others to do a commemorative event next year, 2027, 26, 27. Take a look at that, get involved. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that was 1927. And then in 1955, in the opening speech at the Bandung conference, President Sukarno says, you know, some of us met, you may remember, in 1927 in Brussels at the League Against Imperialism. He points at Nehru and others. You said 10 years. Think about that. That was 23 years later, 26 years later, 28 years later, they meet and they've become heads of governments and they have agendas and they are actually accountable to their movements. I mean, I feel like we should remember that in 1945, Indonesia declared its independence. Holland went back and fought a brutal war for 3 years to prevent it, and Indonesia prevailed. Should also remember that the Congo could have had a different history had the Belgian government not intervened and participated in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in 1961, delivered the country to Mobutu Seko Seko. I mean, think about what a different story that would have been had they come to power and stayed. It's partly about the politics of Europe and what Europe will do and Europe's future. But also keep in mind the future of the rest of the world. I mean, you've got to prevent Europe from intervening through NATO, for instance, to overthrow the governments in the Sahel, to undermine the government in Senegal, trying desperately to produce a new future. The new government in Ghana, led by John Manama, center-left government. It's not a revolutionary, but he's a good-thinking person, wants to bring some element of justice to his country. The government of Dasanayaka in Sri Lanka, got to help these governments make space for them. You've got to tell NATO that it has to cool it. There's no such thing as global NATO. In fact, there shouldn't be such a thing as NATO. Why are you guys so submissive to the Americans? Stand up for yourselves, Europe. Stand up for yourselves.
Well, that's an agenda, I would say.
Thank you for that.
We just started the conversation, basically, but as starting a movement shows us, it takes time to develop, and we don't have the time tonight. So I would like to thank the participants to this panel discussion or panel conversation very much. Elena Aoun Koenraad Bogaert and Vijay Prashad gave the best of them, and they thought clearly about emancipation, about fighting, about working with movements, about time is on our side if we keep struggling. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. You were superb. You are really a superb moderator.